So I'm actually having a little bit of a midlife crisis this year. It's a search industry midlife crisis, but it was 10 years ago that I went to my very first Lucene Revolution, and it was my very first search conference. And 10 years ago, I remember meeting an older guy and asking him, "Oh, how long have you been doing search?" And he said, "Oh, I've been doing search for like 10 years, and I'm just starting to figure it out," right? Well, the Eric Pugh of 10 years ago must have been an asshole because he was thought to himself, 10 years? It's going to take me 3 years to figure out search. Well, here I am 10 years later after my very first search conference, and I feel like I'm just starting to figure it out. So today's talk, today we're going to be learning about a lot of really exciting ideas around improving e-commerce search. And I'm really excited to be here at MICES because I've organized an unconference for about 10 years. And so I really love this format of bringing together sort of structured content in the morning and unstructured content in the afternoon, where we're all talking about, I think, a topic that is having its moment in the sun, right? E-commerce search is, I think, an area of a lot of interest, organizations investing in it, new ideas, new events. Just the fact that we're having MICES today sort of says that e-commerce is kind of arriving, e-commerce search is arriving. But one thing that I want us all to remember at this conference today is that there's one ingredient that we tend to forget when we're at these types of conferences, and that ingredient is what I want to talk about today, the missing ingredient. So this missing ingredient, is it a powerful, dare I say, magic machine learning algorithm that lets us understand where the user is in their buying process? Is it an approach with natural language processing that takes really messy user-generated descriptive data and extracts tags and keywords into a nice, clean metadata structure? Or is it maybe we solve building chat or avatar-based applications and I can have a natural language conversation with my e-commerce application to guide me in buying the perfect car? No, there's one key ingredient that we need, and fortunately, we have it already, every single one of us. It's people are the magic ingredient that we can't forget about when it comes to e-commerce search. So hopefully, Sebastian and the rest of my folks in our class yesterday are okay with me putting up this photo, right? Yesterday, there were 17 of us all sitting around a table discussing e-commerce search. And we all came from different backgrounds, different companies, different industry verticals, different specific roles in e-commerce. And we all contributed to the discussion, and I think it led to a much better class experience for everyone. So some of you may have seen this slide that I was put together and showed at Lucene Revolution in 2016. Tim Allison has used it a couple of times, and it's a search maturity model that I was using to think about how do we organize our search efforts. And it's based on Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Some of you may be familiar with that, right? Which says that as human beings, we have to satisfy our basic needs first: security, food, before we can start thinking about our psychological needs: love, friendship, right? And once we have those things in place, we can think about self-actualization and becoming the best version that we could possibly be. So I thought to myself, hey, I could apply that to search, right? We could start out at the basics with a search box. We could layer on a modern UI. We could then work on our relevance. At that point, we're ready for contextualization. And then eventually, we're getting to the top of the pyramid, and we're doing predictive sort of things to help our people find what they want, right? Well, guess what? This model, I used it for 2 years, and it didn't work. My pyramid, the idea that we're all going to journey up this pyramid, was flawed because it had a much too narrow definition of what maturity is when we're applying it to e-commerce search. You can look at this and see it's very tech feature centric, and it's not broad enough. To build a great e-commerce search team, you need many, many pyramids. You have to climb many different pyramids. So today, I'm going to show you how we at Open Source Connections like to think about search maturity. And it's not just a single pyramid. It's many, many pyramids. So while one pyramid graphic works well in a presentation, many pyramids quickly breaks down. So here I'm going to show it in a nice, clean, tabular format. So, little bit of an eye chart, but the idea is that we look at search teams who are evaluating doing a project through these 7 verticals. And we look at them and try to understand where they are on their maturity, right? Are they at a baseline? Are they practitioners? Are they advanced? And we like to think about, to accomplish something, where do you actually need to be, right? Not everybody needs to be at the top in every one of these verticals. So we look at it from a business perspective, right? How does the search team work with the business? How does the business work with the search team? Do we understand our users, right? A hard problem. Do we really feel like we understand what our users are trying to accomplish on the search platform? Do we have the right technology in-house, right? Proprietary code, commercial code, Elasticsearch, Solar, Vespa maybe, right? Do we have the right technology platform, and do we know how to build our plugins? And then I think this is increasingly important is, are we experimental? Are we willing to accept failure, right? Will we try out 100 ideas when 90 of them may fail, but 10 of them may give us the improvements in e-commerce search that we need? And does our user experience allow our users to find what they need? And UX is changing rapidly, right? Now, for a while, we were all excited about doing UX on a mobile phone. Then it became doing user experience through, well, chat and voice, right? So is our application keeping up? And then do we understand the data that we need, right? Data is getting more complex. Our products are getting more complex. Do we have all the attribution? Is the data clean? Is it in the syntax that our users use? And lastly, sort of a data inventory perspective. So when we're looking at a project, we want to shine a light on a search team and understand where are they and where do they want to be. So if you're contemplating a sophisticated learning to rank project, well, then you better be pretty confident in your ability to do experimentation, because that's what learning to rank requires, is sophisticated experimentation. Feature engineering is a nice word for let's try lots of things and see if any of them improve search results. And if we're going to be doing that, we better have a data science team, an NLP team, right? We better have those people who understand how to work with the data. If we're asking our management team to make a major investment in search, well, then we better really understand what is the business looking for from search, right? And it's probably something more nuanced than just more revenue, right? And if we're going to be making a big business case that if we invest, we can drive these results, well, it's probably really important for us to have a good handle on our users, right? And at least have a good enough sense that, yes, if we do these things, we will enable our users and we will meet these business goals. Maybe you've used an outsourced partner and you're thinking about insourcing your search, right? That suggests that before you start reaching for really sophisticated techniques, maybe awesome ideas that maybe you heard right here today in this conference, maybe you need to have a good baseline and really make sure that you're ready to improve. So how do we figure that out, right? The maturity model lays out where we are. How do we make sure that we have the team, the people, to get there? So I'm going to share a technique that we copied from the management consulting industry. Blatantly stole it is probably a better way of saying it. And it helps us think about what is a search team. We find that most search teams have a very narrow definition of what a search team is, right? And as Renee kind of suggested, he was happy that we have some UX folks and that we have product management, right? A search team that is all developers is probably not a real strong search team. And so we want to break down that thinking that a search team is a developer-centric function. And we want to get everybody around the table, just like in that class yesterday where everybody was contributing. So this exercise that I'm going to walk you through lets us understand what are all the gaps in our teams and what do we need to do to have that team, the right people, to build a great search experience. All right, step number 1. So I love these big sticky pads, and as my class knows, I also love the Sharpie flip chart markers that make it so easy to write on these things. So what we like to do is get everybody who is a stakeholder in search. Let's think broad. Let's think holistic. It might be customer service people. It might be engineering, merchandisers, product management, data science, ops, developers, right? Front-end engineering team. Let's get everybody into a room. And what I like to do is ask everybody to write down what are 10 to 15 things that you need to do to build a great search, e-commerce search platform that meets our business goals. Examples of things that you might write down: reviews 0 results found, right? Pretty obvious thing. Clean up dirty data, deploy servers, but also interview users for feedback, conduct UX workshops, right? Interview customer service agents for frequent issues that they're getting calls about, right? And we go through and we write all of these down. In this picture, you see 2 of the sticky pads, but out of this exercise, we had 6 or 8 of these sticky pads. Yes, it gets to be a list of 75 or 90 things that are everything. But the value of that brainstorming is it gets us all out of our little narrow world view, our parochial view of what is search, and it lets us start thinking about what everybody else also thinks about in this rather fuzzy concept that we call search or e-commerce search. What does it mean to each person? So this is great. We now have this long, long list of everything. One of my favorite ones here is anxiety-free search development, right? I want to be able to do search, write code, and not be nervous that I'm breaking things. So once we have all of that, then what do we do? Well, we cluster all the tasks, right? We're technologists. We have data science among us. Many of us have done clustering activities. So we start at the very beginning, operating the cluster, right? Don't overthink what the numbers mean. We just put a 1 next to the very first item, operating the cluster. And then we, as a group, look at the second thing. Is scoping search requirements for the product similar to operating the cluster? No, of course not. So we put a 2 next to it. It's a new cluster. All right, thinking about conversion metrics. Is that really tightly coupled to operating the cluster of search servers or scoping search for our product? No, it's its own thing. So we tag it with a 3. And so on and so forth. So you see the 4th item. In our group, we said, does thinking about marketing campaign opportunities, is that kind of tied to conversion metrics? Well, we want our marketing campaigns to produce numbers and data so that we know whether they're working or not. So we said, yes, we want to have marketing campaigns that are supported by our conversion metrics. And so we said, yes, that is tightly related to conversion metrics. Understanding user behavior was a 4, prioritizing search task was a 5, ensuring backups exist and restore. That actually seems pretty similar to operating the cluster, so we put a 1. So we go ahead and we do this activity across the 75, 90, 100 different tasks that we are thinking about. We go on until we get to the end, and typically we end up with sort of 10 to 15 different groups, right? I feel like the mean average is 12 unique groupings or clusterings that happen in a search team. Then we take a break because this is a lot of work. And lastly, some items seem very closely tied to multiple clusters. So you remember I mentioned my anxiety-free search development? Well, you can see that that got tagged with a 1, a 6, and a 4. So those are 3 groups that actually all really care about and were tightly related to things to do anxiety-free search development. So there we go. There's 2 of the 6 sheets all clustered together up to with 12 different clusters. And now that we have, as a holistic search team, right, kind of a shared understanding of what is everything that goes into search, right, and how are they related together, right, and who needs to do what, well, then it's time to kind of take these numbers and convert them to labels or names for these different roles in a search team. So I like to hand out sticky notes to everybody and have everybody in the team name every single one of these. And sometimes you have very sort of traditional nomenclature, right? This team considered the grouping cluster number 1, they called that infra. They like to name them after a team, so infrastructure. I've seen other teams maybe call that search ops, right? Or IT or systems, right? They have product, they have engineering. They called out a data science quantitative, right? They also had a whole group of people doing user research that they called qualitative, right? And then the one somewhat amusing title was they created the data maven. This is the person who's responsible for the data and making sure it was clean. So we go ahead, we put all our sticky names through, we have a discussion, and eventually we settle on a name for each one of these roles. And eventually then, it comes up time, so how do we use this? We have to put some names on these different roles. So here is a team that was really excited to do learning to rank. They had a data scientist on the search team who had prototyped some stuff. And then when I met them, we were talking about learning to rank, we were excited about learning to rank, and then someone mentioned that the data scientist was leaving the team and going elsewhere. And all of a sudden, all of the excitement about deploying learning to rank to production came to a screeching halt when we realized that there were some big voids in this team, right? They had engineering, they had product, they had UX design, they felt like they had infrastructure, they sort of had a marketing angle involved, but on the data maven, user research, and data science areas, they had no one on the team. And so before embarking on a significant data-driven learning to rank project, step 1 was they needed to build out those people. They needed to go find those people, right? Or the project would be a disaster. So here's another one that I see maybe more commonly. So this was a search team that had been not an official search team, but they had been doing search for 10 years, right? And they were really focused on, does my front-end application return me some user results, and is it fast enough, right? And they were really nervous about upgrading Solar, and they had a lot of people working on that and security patches and all of that. When I met them, right, they were just starting to think about relevance. And so we went through and did this exercise, and it became very clear that The existing search product manager, Alice, was sort of a part-time person, and they didn't really have a great vision of where was search supposed to go. What was this e-commerce search really going to do? They had a gap in sort of product vision and product management, right? They had a caretaker person, so hence the void. They also did not have the skills in-house to really get in there and optimize the search results and improve them. So that was a void. But the rest of their team was really great. They had a really robust team. And so with them, it was very easy to say, all right, you need to do these 3 things to fill in your relevancy gap. You need to nail down your roadmap a little bit better so that we all know where we're going over the next 12 months, and you're going to be very successful. So I want to leave this sort of last thought here, which is search is a team sport. So when we get back to our offices, either tomorrow for some of you, or I'm on vacation next week, so 2 weeks for me, right? We're all going to come back with lots of ideas that we've learned at this conference, right? New techniques, new ways of thinking about it, right? But what I want you to remember is that search is not an individual activity, it's a team sport, and that people are the missing ingredient that we need to be successful. Thank you.
I have a question about the slide you had where you put up the table of the skills you need. Because I think one of the interesting questions for us, for example, at Otto is how you do a transition from one place you are at. You figure out where you are and what you want to do, and how you figure out, or I find it's hard to figure out where you need to go next. So what do you need to do to go to the next place to improve?
So I think one of the things, and one of the great things about conferences like MICES, right, is you actually have a great opportunity right now to talk to a lot of peers and understand what works and what hasn't worked and what people did next, right? And I think that historically in the sort of e-commerce world, we have not been very good about sharing those stories as a community. And so there aren't a lot of really well-documented best practices, right? And I hope that we'll see more people telling stories about projects that went wrong, not just about projects that went right, you know? When we use these with customers, right, we kind of look at where it is, and then what we look for is where does making a big investment going to make a big payoff, right? Typically trying to move up this sort of maturity model across the board doesn't provide enough value to justify trying to work everywhere, right? But you'll look at what your roadmap is and then what you need and say, oh, we need to invest in this specific vertical for the next 6 months or the next year, right? And that's going to enable our next set of projects. You know, if you know that your data is really dirty, right, and you know that that's giving you a lot of problems, then you might want to focus on content enrichment. But if you still don't really have a good sense of how good your data is or how well it's working, right, then maybe you need to work more on analytics, right, so that you can actually measure those things and then understand if that's an area you need to focus. That's a little bit of a non-answer, I understand that, but I think that talking to more of your peers, making sure your people have the right skills, right, I think is the other thing that you can do, right? More training, more book learning. Sometimes we focus on like delivering the next feature so much that we don't stop and say, hey, as a team, let's do a workshop and think about what we could be doing. Go one step beyond the sprint retro. So.
Wait a second. There's a micro coming to. Thanks. One question about, I mean, I really like this kind of holistic approach of getting all the stakeholders in the same room and trying to figure out what everyone thinks search really is. My question is, and this doesn't necessarily only apply to search, but more generally, I mean, how do you get them into the room in the first place? Because, I mean, search is something that everyone uses, but in our case, also people kind of take ownership of parts of search. Maybe they do like some re-ranking on their own based on what they think is important for the app versus the website. I mean, how do you make people understand that search is really something you need to solve overall?
I think that you have to educate your organization, right? Especially if you're, I mean, if you're an organization where you don't have a dedicated search team, I sometimes think that's almost better, because then you have lots of people from lots of different organizations who all have the skills that you need, this sort of holistic approach. And what you need to do is educate people and get people to be starting to think together as a search team. And you have to educate people on the value of it, right? And one of the things is, if you can't tie search to the business goals really effectively, then it becomes that much harder. Right? So I see a lot of companies that will do workshops or talks, or, I'm going to go and visit the content people and talk about good content from a search perspective, right? And so there's an evangelism that you need to do inside your organization to get everybody together. If you can do decent KPIs, and if you can surface up the problems, or the revenue you could be generating, or whatever the metric is that you're working on, if you can put that in front of people and say, hey, this is where we are, look at what we're losing or what we could be gaining, then that obviously makes it a lot easier, right? It's a little hard for me to answer that question, because most of the companies that I visit already know that they have a problem, otherwise I wouldn't be visiting them. So they've already gone through that first hurdle. But typically, it's somebody knows they have a problem, and if we can do a workshop for 2 days and get everybody in the room, then it opens up the other ideas, right? Oh, marketing realizes that this is why search matters, or the data people who aren't giving you real-time data in order to do real-time pricing understand that real-time pricing is important in your search use case, right? I wish I had a perfect answer for you on how to start it, and I feel like it's an education. So.
Thanks.
Okay. Any further questions to Eric?
Terrific. Well, thank you very much, everyone, and I'd love to talk more about this. So, yeah, excited to be here. Thank you.
Thank you.